would like to learn how to make these gorgeous little boxy zipper pouches, you might want to continue and follow on and watch this video. So the main difference with these boxy zipper pouches compared to a lot that you'll see around is these are actually finished on the inside with French seams. So there's no binding or anything on the seams. Your lining stays nice and neat inside the bag so it doesn't flop around or anything on you. And this is a French seam finish. So the raw edges are actually encased inside this seam. So if you'd like to learn how to make these, follow along. The size I'm going to be making today, I'll show you a look, is this one here. So the difference between this one and this one is just in the cutting measurements. This one here, I have cut my pieces of fabric. I'll grab the fabric for the one I'm going to be making today. So for the exterior, I'm going to be using this beautiful piece of fabric. So this is cut 10 inches wide by 5.5 inches high. So that makes this size. This size here, which is just a fraction smaller, as you can see there, that's the two side by side. This little one was cut still 10 inches wide, but only 5 inches high instead of 5.5 like this one is. So, and that's the result. They're the perfect size, so you can fit like your pens. Like there's just an example of a pen. There's plenty of room in there for your pens, lipsticks, toiletries, little cosmetic pouch to put in your handbag. The uses are just endless for what you want to use these for, but there's just a handy little pouch. Now you can see it's not thick and bulky, it's super thin, so easily sewn on a domestic sewing machine. The only interfacing used to make these, where they still stand up like that, is on the exterior. I've just put one layer of just a lightweight non-woven interfacing, and it just adds just that little bit of structure to the bag. But it's these French seams that actually give the whole bag its structure and make it stand up like that. So there's no thick interfacings or anything. The lining is just nothing, it's just the fabric. So this material I'm using is 100% cotton. So quilting cottons are great. You can use coordinating prints. So I've got heaps of these that I've made. Fat quarter friendly projects. So if you had 2 fat quarters, you could actually make a couple of these pouches quite easily. So to make this, I've got my 2 lining pieces. I'm going to put my label on one. I've just used some wash away glue there just to hold that in place, and I'll sew that down. I've placed this label 1.5 inches down from the raw edge of the material, and then I've just centered it, and I'm just going to have that inside the bag. So I've got my 2 lining pieces, no interfacing or anything, and then I've got my 2 exterior pieces with just the lightweight fusible interfacing. We'll need a zipper. I'm using zipper tape, and zipper tape just needs to be 10 inches long. You can cut it longer if you find that easier, or if you're using a dress zipper, just have your dress zipper longer so that your zipper pull is not in the road while you're sewing, so you don't have to move the zipper pull in and out of the road. And then once we've finished doing this section, I'll just remind you when to pull that zipper pull back in before you trim off the excess zipper tape. And then I've just got a zipper pull, so to coordinate. So I'm just using coordinating. And we've also got our little tabs. So these little tabs on the end, you could use them in contrasting fabric if you like. I've just used the same exterior fabrics for these, and they'll just sit up there. Just makes it easy. Pull your little pouches out. So for that, I cut 1 piece of fabric. accidentally zoomed in there. Don't know what I hit. Hit something on my phone. So I've just cut this one piece of fabric, and I've cut it 7 inches long, and I've cut it 1.5 inches wide. I've pressed that there. I've given that a press down at the iron. A little bit of adhesive there. Let's pull that off. That will get stitched in. Just had a little bit of adhesive on my pressing mat. So 3 inches wide, 7 inches long. I folded it in half and I pressed it, and then I pressed these seams towards the center, these edges, and I left a little gap in the middle just to allow for that turn of cloth, and then I've pressed it again. So we're going to start off, we'll stitch down both sides, and then we will cut it in half, and that will give us 2 little tabs that are both the same length. So that's what we'll be doing with those. So that's all you need to get started on this one. So first off, what I'll do, so I don't forget, is I will stitch my label in place. I'll just set those to the side until we need them. So for this, I'm using the coordinating thread for my lining, so my stitching will stand out on my label. To sew my label on, I'm just using a stitch length of about 2.4. I'll just do 1 locking stitch just to secure that in place. Just stitch around the edges of my label. Snip that little thread. You can pull your threads through to the back and tie a knot and that, but this is just a little sew-in label that's inside the bag. And I'll just go over 1 stitch and do another little locking stitch. And there's my label. That's just stitched in place there. Now, I don't have to worry about that. So if we grab one of our exterior pieces, set that to the side there for a minute, grab our exterior and our zipper tape. So I'll just trim my zipper tape while I'm here. Again, there you can put your zipper pull on now if you like and have it hanging to the side, or you can wait until you're finished and then put that on. I'll just cut my zipper tape a little bit longer. So there's my zipper tape there. If I wanted to put my zipper pull on now, we can do that. Decide which end I like to start with. I like to have, let's trim this one here off. I'll put this zipper pull on, just so I can show you how to have your zipper pull out of the road. And if you are using zipper tape with a pull, just feed that through. There we go. So you want to make sure that when you put your zipper pull on, that it's level, that you don't have a bubble on either side. So you want it to be nice and straight. So there's my zipper pull, and I can see that my zipper tape is still lovely and straight. So what we're going to do with the zipper, right side down, just going to pull out of the road if you wanted to so that you don't accidentally pull your zipper pull off. You can just do a couple of stitches over the end of that tape, and that will just stop that zipper from coming off the end. So, zipper tape right side down on top of the right side of your exterior. Sorry, it will just base that in place. I'm going to base that. Oh, sorry, I've got a little bit of a cold still. So I can base this in place using about a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Just going to change my stitch length to a stitch length of 3. And we'll do a couple of little locking stitches just to make sure that that zipper doesn't move or come off. I'm just lining up the top edge of that zipper with that top edge of the fabric. Don't pull on your zip or anything, just let it lay down there nice and flat. Just keeping everything lined up straight. So there's our zipper, right sides together. So now what we will do is we will put on one of our lining pieces. Now this, because of the way the zipper opens, this will be the front of my bag because the zipper pull will open the bag from this end. So I'm going to put my front lining piece on, so not the one with my label because that will go on the back. So it's my other one, and I'm going to line these up so that the top edge and the ends line up perfectly like that. You can, if you like, you can put a couple of clips or a couple of pins. If you did want to clip this in place, just a couple of clips just to keep it there so it doesn't shift. That's all you need. Now, so from the exterior side, I like to sew because that's my most stable fabric, and then I put the lining on the bottom. And I've got this row of stitching here that I already made that I can use as a guide as well. And we want to sew on my machine. I'm sewing at about 3/8 of an inch in so that I can get closer to this zipper tape. If you've got a zipper foot, you might be able to adjust your needle, or if you've got, like me, I've got a little narrow toe foot for my machine. I'm using a Brother PQ 1500 SL machine. So you just want to get closer to those zipper teeth, but not right up to them, but just closer to them. We'll lock those stitches. Move that out of the road. And that's our zipper in place. So that's sandwiched in between there. So we can just pull that down and we can finger press here. These edges, the bottom edges of our lining and exterior, they should line up. So if you grab a hold of those and just give them a gentle pull, you can just finger press along here. And that's nice and even. And there's the back. We will stitch that down, but before we do that, because we'll top stitch this down to secure it in place, we'll do the opposite side. So we'll get our next exterior piece, and what we're going to do is we're going to lay that so that it is right sides down on top of that zipper, so the right side of the zipper tape to the right side of the exterior, just like that, and we'll base that in place. So you can base that from this side or this side, whichever's easier for you. and I will use that about 1/4 of an inch. Again, locking those stitches and just base that in place. Lining up that top edge again there, so keeping everything nice and straight. Just adjust your fabric as you go, just to keep everything nice and even as possible. Okay, so that's now secure in place, and now we'll get our second lining piece. So there's my second lining. Place that right sides together over the top of the zipper tape, and again there I will sew from this side, lining up those edges. And so doing the same distance, so I'm doing like that through about 3/8 of an inch up close to the zipper teeth. Just keeping these top edges lined up. Lining theirs. And that's done. Got any little threads or frayed edges, just trim those off. Got less chance of them getting caught in the seam allowances. So now we can pull this one back. Getting off these little bits of threads. So pulling down, lining up the bottom edges of that lining in the exterior, and I can pull those down and finger press. And then I'll do that on the right side. Now we can see that our fabric is even on both sides, so we can close up our zipper if we like, or we can keep it out of the road. What we're going to be doing is we're going to top stitch now on both sides. I don't find there's a need. If I just finger press that, there's no need to press it with the iron. It will all stay beautifully in place. So if you find it easier, keep that zipper pull out of the road, and we can top stitch. Now you can do whatever stitch length you like. I'm going to sew approximately 1/8 of an inch away from this folded edge of this fabric, but you could sew between 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch, whatever you are comfortable with sewing. I'm going to stick with my stitch length of 3. And there's that little row of top stitching detail there. Now we'll do the same for the other side, just making sure that they're still all down nice and neatly, and I'll do the same distance again there. Oh, I think I've unthreaded my machine, so if that happens to you, it happens quite easily. This one's got a little needle threader. I know some people have a hard time with these little drop pull down needle threaders, but they're actually quite easy. There's a little prongs that stick out. If I just pull that thread through that prong, and there's a little pin that comes down here. If I just hold that in front of there and then pull on that lever. Of course not going to do it because I'm talking there. Hold that, pull on that, and that will pull that through. And there we go, needle threaded. So back to the top stitching. A locking stitch there. You need to stop and just check to make sure your lining fabric hasn't moved. Okay, snip off our little threads. And that section is done. So our lining's nice and secure in place, and so is our exterior. So we can now pull that zipper pull into the middle, and that will just stay there. So what we want to do now, we can, these little tabs, I better get the one that's for this. I've got several cut. I've got quite a few orders of these. So we can actually install this now, and then it's already done. So to make this little tab, I just need to, where those folded edges are, I'm going to stitch down the sides, and I'm going to use the same top stitching length that I've used on here. So a stitch length of 3, and I'm about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And then I'll come down and I'll sew along this side as well. Now all we need to do is we can fold this in half, get our scissors and snip. Now we've got 2 zipper little tabs for the ends. Just trim these ends off. They're done. So that's our little tabs. You can have a look and decide, you know, if you've got a side that you favour better more than the other one. All we want to do now is fold these so that these little raw edges are together. And we're going to just place them on top, centered over that zipper tape there. And you'll see there, it'll probably sit approximately between your stitches there. And we can base that in place. There's one. And then we can do this one. There's our little raw edges. Line those up over the end and just base them in place. Between 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch from the edge. Just trim off any little stray threads. So they're in place now. They're ready to go. So what we want to do now is we want to get our 2 exterior pieces together. You can pin or clip these if you like. And we're going to sew this bottom seam, and we're going to use a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Back stitch at the beginning and the end. Just keeping these edges lined up as we sew. back stitch at the end, and that one's done. Now we do want to press these seams open, so we can give these a finger press now. And use your finger, or if you've got like a little tool. We will be stitching these with these seams pressed flat. Now we're going to do the lining. So we'll get our 2 lining pieces. We want to leave a opening in the bottom of the lining to be able to turn our pouch through. So what we can do is you can get a couple of pins if you like. This makes it easier for you. I'll just place a pin on the end here to hold that together, and one here. Then we want to leave an opening in the middle. About that big is plenty big enough. So that there is, there's a 10, that's about 3.5 inches there in the centre, roughly in the centre. So we can place a pin there. And place a pin there. So we're going to be sewing from here to here, leave an opening, and here to here. If sometimes, here's a little tip, if you tend to sew past, if you put 2 pins where your stop and start areas are, that's a handy little reminder. Now we're going to be sewing this again using the same seam allowance, so 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch. Lock those stitches. Now we've come up to our double pin, so we know this is where we need to stop. Come up close and just back stitch to lock that stitches in place. Then come along, you can move those pins out of the road. Oh. Lock those stitches. And there's our bottom seam. So what we can do here, because it's such a little seam, if we finger press these open now, if you start on each end, get my finger in there, finger press that open. If I finger press here like this, this will naturally fold at that opening. So I can finger press that, and that will make that easier when we go to close that hole up. Again, there you can use that little tool if you find that helpful. That's done. Nice and easy. So all we need to do now is there's our exterior and there's our lining. I'm going to bring these together. We're going to line up these seams over the top of this zipper, so it's all in the middle. So this seam here should line up over the top of the center of that zipper tape. So that's lined up, centered. And these ends here, they should also line up at these edges here. And we can put a pin or a clip, whatever you find easier. Clip those in place. We can come along and we can adjust as needed. Maybe that lining isn't quite right. So the lining needs to be centered on that seam, on that zipper, and that top. There we go. I'll just use a clip. Sometimes clips are easier. And clip that edge in place, making sure that everything here is still centered. Come over to this side and can sort of put a little memory crease there, and we can clip that edge in place. So everything, just check that it's all still centered in there. What we're going to do now is we're going to sew a 1 centimetre seam all the way across here. So we can lay that down. Just get that thread out. And there, lining up this edge on that 1 centimetre seam. I'll back stitch at the end just to secure those stitches in place. Now we're coming up to the zip. So this is our bulkiest little bit of an area here. So we're going to gradually come up and we'll come down over that edge. So if you just hold that securely down in place and just go slow. You might need to give your machine a little helping hand up over that lump. And down the other side we go. Just maintaining that 1 centimetre seam allowance. And back stitch. And that's in place there. There's no need to, you don't really need to reinforce that. Zip's in there, it's not going anywhere. You can now cut off that excess zipper tape. So it's lined up there. Trim any of those threads. And we're going to do the same to the opposite end. If your fabric seam comes over a little bit, don't worry too much. It's really not even going to be noticeable. So we want to keep this open. There's our little tab. Center this, there's the zipper teeth. Center that seam over the zipper teeth and center that seam there over those zipper teeth. So everything is centered there. These should line up at the edges and these should line up at the edges. And we can put a clip if we want to on there, one on there, and one on there. Little threads caught on there. Now we're going to sew a 1 centimetre seam allowance again. Just going to double check to make sure I keep those seam allowances open underneath there. Reverse, lock the stitches, coming up to that zipper. Just make sure my seam allowance is flat. And I can snip those threads. So that's that done. Now what we want to do, everything's looking all neat and even, no puckers or anything, is we can reach inside. We can actually open up that zipper. And we can turn this bag through that opening. So just gently push it through. We're going to come through, push out our little corners. Just get it roughly in place to start with. Now, what we can do is we can close up this little opening before we even go any further, because while we're at this stage we might as well do that. So you can see there I've already got that little crease for that to easily line up and sew together. I'm just going to tuck that little thread in there. Get in there, you. Tuck that in. You can see it's perfectly lined up. So if you find you need to, you can put a couple of pins. So that's where we're going to stitch between where we started and stopped. So I can see here where I've stopped. Sometimes it's not easy to find. So I knew that I need to stop here, and there's my little starting area. And I can just put a pin there. Just helps let me know. So if you do find you need to, you can place a pin in the middle just to help keep those ends lined up. It's not really necessary, but if you find that helps. And then we're just going to stitch this down. You can hand sew that, but I just find on these little tiny little pouches it's really not necessary. For a high-end bag and that, yes, I do hand sew those, but for a little tiny little zipper pouch, I like to reduce my stitch length back down to about a 2 for closing these little seams. And I just do a single little locking stitch there, and that's done. You want this stitch to be sort of fair, as discreet as you can. A shorter stitch length helps with that, just keeping those folded edges lined up. The aim is not to fall off the edge. So you can stitch as close or as far away as you're comfortable with. And now I know I'm at the end there. And I can just cut those threads. And that's a nice little discreet little seam. Did I catch everything? Oh, I fell off the edge there. But because I've got such a tiny little stitch length, you can see that is so discreet. It's easy now to just come back from this little side here. Actually, I'm glad that did that. And I'm just going to put my needle down where I was on the right track. And I'll do one little stitch again. I'll just lock that. And I'm just going to come over just that little bit further there and catch that. Just making sure that that's all caught. And then I can trim those threads. And I've caught both sides, and it's a nice discreet little seam. And we can push that in. You can see that's a pretty discreet little seam in the bottom there. So that's it. Now let's get in and make our little boxy corners. So what we want to do first is we want to get these corners out. I'm going to use, like, you can use any kind of little corner tool you've got. Just get in there and just get those corners out. Get that fabric lined up nice so you can run your little tool along. So we want that fabric all sitting in there nicely, like the lining as well as the exterior. Create a nice little crease there. You can do a finger crease, and we'll come along, poke this little corner out, get him out nice and sharp, get those folds along there, and fold along there. So there's a nice little corner. Give that a little finger press, See, they're sitting lovely and flat. Now while we're here, we're going to make some markings. We can close this little pouch. Actually, we'll do all the corners and then we'll do all our markings at the same time. So we'll come over to this side, push that little corner out, run that along, get those seams out so they're nice on this side. So get that lining in there so it's all nice and neat. And we should have a nice little corner here. Something doesn't seem to be sitting right, just make sure you've got this seam all open. Push that through and we'll get that little corner out. There we go. Nice and straight now. See how that fixed that up? So that's all sitting in there right along that seam. Lining sitting inside there. Come along to this side. We'll push this corner out. Get your little tool in there if you need to. Get this seam lined up and this seam lined up. So all our corners are out and our fabrics are sitting in there. We can close that up to make this next bit a little easier. Get that little finger press. You can, if you like, you can just leave your pouch like that and you'd have a finished little pouch. Just be a flat little pouch, but it's all finished inside. There's no raw edges or anything there, so you could leave that like that. What we're going to do now is we're going to draw some lines. So these will be our little guidelines to help make sure our corners are perfectly spaced. So we're going to draw a 3/4 inch little box on these ends. I'll bring this over a bit closer to myself here. So I want the 3/4 inch mark lined up on this corner perfectly, or as best as you can. And then you can just use a chalk mark, or a fine pen is better. We want to be able to see these corners are the most important things because they're going to be our guides. So basically a little 3/4 inch box. We'll do that on each corner. Making sure those little corners are marked. And there, 3/4 inch. It's hard when I can't get my head directly over the top. Got the camera in the road there. So 3/4, 3/4 mark, and 3/4 mark. Then we're going to flip this over and we're going to repeat this on the opposite side as well. And these little marks are going to be little intersecting guidelines. It's well worth doing this to get the corners nice and even. And this one only takes a minute to do. And lucky last. So nice straight on that one. Pretty good. It's these ones here that are your important ones. You want them as accurate as you can. Now, if we open up our pouch, we can put our fingers inside and put your finger in. There's that little point. Now, if we see these little intersecting sides on each side there, if we look from this side, you'll see this seam now will be in the middle, and those little corners, they will match up. So that was the box that you drew, and there's that little intersecting point, and there's that intersecting point. Now these will all be matching, so we just want to make sure that that lining is tucked up in there as well, and then we can just follow this line here because that's our stitch line. So we're just going to back stitch at the beginning and the end using a stitch length of 3. Oh, must have my tension not quite set right. Might have it a little bit tight because my thread, my needle became unthreaded again. So I could just release that tension a little bit. That in there, pull that thread through. Now, get my little corner again. That, just make sure that lining is sitting in there. So we are sewing on the right side. The lining's inside, so this is the right side of your fabric. And again there, stitch, just stitch on that line. That's all you got to do. Back stitch at the beginning and the end. And we'll do that for each corner. These little threads. So now we'll come and do this corner. So again there, put your finger inside, just push that lining. You'll find that it naturally falls where it's meant to. That'll be that little peak, and there's that little peak there. You just follow that stitch line again. There's those two done. Now we'll come and do these two. Again, just push that fabric in, get that corner out so it's a nice little peak. And again there, it just tends to want to fall exactly where it's meant to. Push that down, double check, there's that little corner where those lines match up. And we've got a nice little straight line for us to follow again. From those threads. And one last one. So there's those little corners, there's those corners, but you can see it just already wants to do that. So there's that little peak, so just push your lining in, hold that down, you can just double check that those are matched up and stitch along that seam line. Now, if we think we might be crooked, what we can do is where that stitch line is there and there, if we line those up and that up, do we have that same distance? Our little peak's matching and our little peak is matching, so they're good. I can check this side, double check, there's our stitch line. Line that up, and they're looking pretty good. I'm happy with that. Now what we want to do is we're actually going to trim off these corners, leaving about just scant of 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 centimetre, 1/4 inch. Just cut them off. We've got our perfect little boxy corners. Now it seems strange because you're cutting off the right side of the fabric. So that's done. Now we can just turn this right side out. There's our lining. Lovely and neat. There's that. And there's that. Okay, so we've got our pouch with the lining facing right side out. Beautifully finished. That's done. Now what we want to do, because we're going to enclose these raw edges. So if we push these corners out, like we've been doing, so get them out so that they're all the way out. Then I'm sort of running my finger along here to make sure that that exterior fabric is tucked in there. Again, on this side, I'm running my finger along. You see that? Get that seam, so it's right on the edge there. And all we're going to do now is we're going to sew a 1 centimetre seam allowance, or it could be a little bit narrower, but just be consistent. So line up this edge, this folded edge, on your guideline. So I'm doing a 1 centimetre seam. I just find it's easier just to stay consistent. There's one. There is one French seam completed. Trim those thread tails. And that's what we have on the outside, and then that's what we have on the inside. So we're just going to repeat that for the other corners. Let's go in there, push out that little corner, push out that corner, just have that fabric, the exterior pushed right in, roll that seam, and sew a 1 centimetre seam allowance. Back stitch at the beginning and the end. Snip your threads. There's our second one done. Now we'll come over and do the other end. So push that corner in, get the lining fabric tucked in there so everything's sitting in there nice and flat. Give that a little roll, get it all smooth. Have that fold lined up on that 1 centimetre seam. Back stitch. Trim our threads. And last seam. Just get that exterior fabric sitting in there nice and snug. Little roll, and that little raw edge, you can see it's sitting in there nice and snug. 1 centimetre seam allowance. A little fold in your fabric, just ease that out. And snip our threads. We've actually finished sewing this pouch. That's all there is to it. Just flick off any loose threads. That's all done. Turn this to the right side. Push out those little corners. You can see they just pop out and sit exactly where they're supposed to. Pop this out. Pop that out. And this corner and this corner. Pull off any little threads there. Always like to just check. No little threads. Nope. And my corners are out. Close up that zipper. And your little boxy pouch is actually finished. That's all there is to it. And it's gorgeous. We haven't even pressed it or anything. We'll put little memory creases in, but it just sits beautifully. So what we can do now, because we want to give this a little bit more structure, but see where the peaks are here, they're quite firm. So all we need to do is you can take this to the iron, is you just have your lining so it's sitting there flat, and because it's all stitched in, it's not loose and flopping around, it stays together beautifully. We can just fold that in. It'll fold in to where the tops of your little peak is. You can just finger press that. Then you can take this to the iron and give that a press as well. But even if you just want to set a little memory crease, and we can already see the difference that that makes. Do this side, push that in, tuck that in, fold that over, give that a little finger press. And we'll do the same to the bottom. You just need to just get those little peaks. Just give that a little press. Do this side. Just want that lining sitting in there. Go this way, it's easier. Lining in, there's those little corners, and just give that a finger press. Now when we go, even just doing that, wait till you see the difference that this makes. At the iron, what I would also do is this little edge here, and just give that a little finger press there between those peaks. Same on this side, a little finger press between those peaks. Then you watch when we zip this up. So there's my label sitting in there. Now we've already got more of a boxy pouch. You can also give these a little press. Depends how much detail you want to go into them, but I always just find a good little finger press, then just going over to the iron and just finishing those off with just a light little press gives you a beautiful finish. But that's it. Then you want to fold it flat, easy storage, tuck that in, those little corners will meet up, tuck that in, those little corners meet up, and that's it. And that's how I post them, so they can travel nice and flat. So that's that little pouch. Now that was our smaller one, just ever so slightly, and these two are the same size. So they're the same size, and that's just your slightly a little bit smaller one. So there we go. Hope you enjoyed that, and have fun making the pouches. Let me know in the comments below. Have a go. Let me know how you go. So if you like this video, be sure to follow along and stay tuned for more sewing videos. Thanks for joining me. Be sure to subscribe. Bye.